Hey guys, Tammy here, and this week we're going to talk about rules of the child custody game. Now, I don't mean to use the word game as if this isn't important. I do have people that make that comment to me sometimes, but it's sort of like a chess game. It's like you need to know the rules of what you're getting into because let's face it, could you win a game that you didn't know the rules to? If you're listening to the podcast or watching me on YouTube, don't forget to hit like and also subscribe so you get notified as new episodes are released each week. If I put you in a game and I said, I'm not going to tell you any of the rules, could you actually win that game? I'm guessing no. Maybe as you went through it and you started to catch on to what the rules of the game were, you would start to get better and better. And I think that that's what happens a lot of times for people that are new to this process with the family court is as it progresses and it goes on, they start to figure out a little more of what works and what doesn't. The problem is at that point, you're already starting in the hole, right? The score is already up against you, and now you're trying to recover and catch up. And if you can figure the rules of the game out from the very beginning, you're going to be so far ahead of your ex as well. This gives you an advantage because they probably are not sitting down and trying to learn all the rules of the game. I find there's usually one person in the pair that does that and one person in the pair that doesn't. So just by the fact that you are listening to me and hearing me means you are probably the person searching out this information. And so if you know the rules of the game, you're going to be way further ahead than they are. I was able to come up with 9 different rules, so I'm going to try to go through these and I'm going to move pretty quickly. The first thing that I would tell you in child custody is don't be a gatekeeper. And moms, this is for you. I see this as trying to micromanage the other person's parenting, asking questions about what are they doing and why. Do you know the child has this issue? Did you talk to the child about that? Did you make sure they brushed their teeth? Did they get to school on time? Why wasn't the homework done? Whatever the issue is that you're coming up with, that you're asking them about, if you have messages that are showing that the court is going to potentially see or is going to potentially be an exhibit that the other person submits, then the court may very well view you as a gatekeeper. And they don't like that because they feel that each parent should be able to have autonomous parenting in their own world unless there is some issue that's this big safety issue. In the scheme of the decisions the court is trying to make, these are not significantly important issues, and then you start to be seen as a gatekeeper, which works against you. The second rule of the child custody game is you have to support the other person's parenting. And this becomes very, very difficult when we feel like the other parent isn't a good enough parent or isn't doing the things that they should be, or is, a negative impact to the child in some way, or whatever we think is going on. And so our tendency tends to be that if I can just show that this parent is doing all of these negative things, then the court is going to see that I'm the stable parent, I'm the reasonable parent, and they're going to side with me. Not so. What the court is looking at is if there's no safety issue, if there's no red flag issue, how do I keep both parents involved with this child? If the court feels like one person is supporting the other person's parenting, that person will actually tend to have the advantage because the court feels like, well, if I give the time to this parent, the child's going to have both parents in their lives. If I give the child to the parent that doesn't support the other person's parenting, the child's only going to have one parent in their life. The third rule is verbal and emotional abuse rarely stick. I would love to tell you that they do. I know many, many people that are coming out of high conflict relationships have a big issue with this. If we've been dealing with a narcissist or a borderline or some high conflict personality of that nature that's really severe, almost everyone says that they experienced verbal and emotional abuse. The problem is that judging that is somewhat subjective, and it depends on each person's perspective. It's not like there's this line where this constitutes verbal and emotional abuse and this doesn't. And that's different for every person. Some people are not used to raise voices, and if you raise your voice at all, they get upset. Some people have been used to a parent that screamed at them, and so unless it gets really extreme, it's not an issue to them. So it's really hard for the court to kind of put their finger on this particular allegation. And this is why we see physical abuse stick in ways that verbal and emotional abuse does not, because physical abuse is more tangible. There's bruises, there's signs of it. And so it's not as much of a subjective perspective as the verbal and emotional abuse are. The fourth rule is don't speak ill of the other parent. Now, I will tell you that most of the time, most people don't do this. Most people know enough not to talk negatively about the other parent, but you'd be surprised. Sometimes they do. This can be very subtle in certain ways. Sometimes it's along the lines of don't tell the other parent that we said or did this thing or that thing, or ask you about this thing or that thing, asking the child to keep secrets from that parent. There's a lot of ways that sort of that negativity around the other parent is built into a person's language. And so you just want to make sure that you're not going there, that you're not questioning the child about the other parent, you're not saying anything negative about the other parent, and you're not bad mouthing them in any way. The fifth rule is don't put children in the middle. You don't want to create a situation where your child is the messenger, where they're having to ask questions back and forth between the households, or letting the children decide things. That puts them in the middle also. The next thing that I see parents do a lot is overreact. And moms, I'm going to speak to you for just a minute here. This is a big one. You've heard me talk about this before if you've listened to me for any length of time. But overreacting is something that we are prone to do, myself included. Women essentially function primarily on emotions. Most women, not all women, but most women function primarily on emotions. And so our reactions tend to be strong. And, there's reasons that we're referred to as mama bears, because you can mess with anything, but don't mess with my kid. But when we start to overreact in front of the court, and the court starts to view us as overly emotional or hysterical or any of those types of things, then it usually will result in negative consequences in our custody case. You don't draw conclusions when you're in front of the court. You just state the facts of the behavior you're observing, what you saw, what you heard, and try to present your information in a calm, focused, concise manner. The seventh thing is don't lie. Please don't lie. Please answer questions. Please write your declaration. Please fill out your financial forms as honestly and truthfully as you possibly can. I can't repeat how many times I have heard Thomas say to clients, please read this and make sure everything is truthful. Here's what happens when you're not truthful. You get in court, something doesn't add up, something doesn't look quite right. The other side brings up some issue they don't agree with about something you said or did or put in there. And the court starts to ask you questions about it. And then you're fumbling and trying to cover your tracks if you have lied about it. And a lot of times where I see this come in is in financial issues, because people are afraid, they're scared financially, they're scared about their financial security, and they're trying to not necessarily lie, but maybe not be brutally honest so that they can try to get the best outcome they can, because they're scared about their own ability to survive. This is going to hurt you more than it helps you. Your credibility is destroyed once the court finds a lie, once the court figures out a spot where you were less than truthful, where you weren't brutally honest. And then what happens is your credibility is shot. And then everything that comes in front of them, they're wondering, were you brutally honest on this, or are you trying to fudge? It's just not worth the damage that it does to your case, to your character, and to your custody situation. It's totally not worth it. So make sure you're being brutally honest on everything you complete. Make sure you're understanding the questions, you know what's being asked, and that you are completing it to the very best of your ability. The next thing is managing your own behavior inside and outside of the courtroom. This is one of the rules that you must follow, because your behavior outside the courtroom dramatically impacts your credibility inside the courtroom. And of course, your behavior in the courtroom in front of the judge also impacts your credibility. And so you have to be able to manage your behavior in both of those realms in order to keep your credibility intact. And I'm going to say it again, credibility is everything, because it impacts everything that you do in your case. Your credibility impacts your case across the board, and it can have a huge impact on the outcome. And so your number one goal in this situation, one of the number one rules, is to keep your credibility intact. I would say that's probably at least in the top 3, if not number 1 for sure. The last rule is have realistic expectations. Now, in order to have realistic expectations, you have to know what the rules of the game are. Like we talked about in the last episode, if you don't know the rules of the game, you're not going to have realistic expectations. It's going to take longer than you think it's going to. It's going to cost more than you think it's going to. It's going to be more stressful than you think it's going to. People are going to dig into details of your life that you didn't think you'd be having to share with anybody. Sometimes people will say, oh, I think that we should have a psychological examination of the other parent. Okay, do you know what's involved in that? Do you know how much it costs? Do you know how much that's going to drag out your process? Do you even know what they're looking for, or if what you suspect is going on is even relevant for that type of evaluation? Do you know that they could order an evaluation on the whole family and that the children could end up being involved? There's all these different ways that it could go that you need to understand, so that as you're asking for these things, you understand what the ramifications of them are. Sometimes people just hear something from another person and they think, oh, the other person had a custody evaluation and they got a good outcome, so I'm going to ask for a custody evaluation. That's not always the best option. Maybe that person had endless money and it wasn't a problem for them. Maybe that person had some red flag issue like alcohol or drugs or something that was a huge safety issue. So you really have to understand what you're up against and not just be asking for things arbitrarily. You really have to understand the rules of this game if you're going to win it. So I hope these 9 rules have been helpful. If you'd like to learn more about my coaching services, please go to Divorce University Online /VIP-coaching. There's a link on that page where you can book a free strategy session with me. I'd love to talk to you and learn more about your situation. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you guys next week.